Story 1. The House on Meridian Loop. The package was already warm when Darnell touched it. Not sun warm. Not sitting in a hot van warm. Warm the way skin is warm when something alive is pressing against the other side of it. He pulled it from the cargo shelf at stop 41 on his route. A medium-sized brown box, no heavier than maybe 3 pounds, addressed to a name he couldn't quite pronounce, and sent to 7 Meridian Loop, Garfield Heights, Ohio. He'd been driving this route for 11 months. He had never heard of Meridian Loop. The Amazon Flex app on his personal phone showed the stop clearly enough. Blue pin, 0.4 miles from his current position. Customer notes read, "Leave at door, do not knock, do not ring bell." Standard enough. Half his stops had notes like that. People who work from home, sleeping babies, dogs that lost their minds at a doorbell. He didn't think anything of it. He should have thought something of it. Meridian Loop wasn't on Google Maps. He checked twice, which he almost never did, because the Flex routing was usually flawless. But when he typed the address manually into his phone's map app, the result came back as a red error banner. No results found for 7 Meridian Loop, Garfield Heights, OH. He tried it without the city, same result. He tried just the street name. The app returned 4 Meridian streets in Ohio, 1 Meridian Drive, and a Meridian Road in a different county. No loop anywhere. But the Flex app insisted, 0.4 miles. Right there, the blue line threading through streets he knew well. He followed it, because that was the job. You followed it, because that was the op. You didn't second-guess the app. His dispatcher, a sweating, harassed man named Gerald, who managed routes for a DSP out of a cramped Parma office, had been crystal clear about that during orientation. The algorithm knows the route better than you do. Trust the algorithm. So Darnell trusted the algorithm, turned left off Turney Road, and found himself on a block he genuinely did not recognize. Not unfamiliar in the way new streets are unfamiliar. Unfamiliar in the way of something fundamentally wrong. The houses on either side of the street were correct. Normal, a rancher with a green lawn, an older colonial with a basketball hoop tilted at a sorry angle in the driveway, a cream-colored double with aluminum siding peeling at the corners. He'd driven past houses like these 10,000 times, but the light here was different. Not different like overcast versus sunny. Different like the light was coming from the wrong direction entirely, casting shadows that angled south when the October sun set squarely in the west. His eyes kept sliding off things, kept refusing to hold detail. He'd look at a mailbox, and by the time his gaze moved 2 feet to the left, he couldn't have told you what color it was. Number 7 was at the end of the loop. He parked, pulled the warm package from the back, and stood on the sidewalk for a moment longer than he should have. The house was a white 2-story craftsman, maybe built in the 1940s, with a covered front porch and 2 large windows flanking the front door. Both windows had their curtains drawn. A flag hung limp from a porch post, but it wasn't an American flag. It wasn't any flag Darnell recognized. The design was simple, just 3 horizontal bars of color. But the colors were wrong in a way he couldn't articulate. The middle bar was a shade that sat between brown and red and something that had no name. He looked at it for 4 seconds and felt his stomach do something unpleasant. He walked up the path, flagstones cracked, with grass pushing up through the seams. The porch steps were solid. The door was solid dark wood, no glass panel, no peephole visible from outside. He was going to leave the package, snap the required photo, and leave. That was it. Customer said, "Don't knock. Don't ring. Easy." He set the box down on the welcome mat, which read, in plain black letters, "W.E. Expect you," and stood up to take the confirmation photo. The door opened before he raised his phone. Not slowly, not dramatically. It just opened, the way doors open when someone on the other side turns the knob. A woman stood in the doorway. Late 60s, maybe early 70s. Gray hair cut short and practical. She wore a yellow house dress that reminded Darnell of the kind his grandmother used to wear to do the dishes on Sunday mornings. She looked completely normal except for 2 things. Her eyes were open very, very wide, not in surprise, wide the way eyes go when someone has been crying for so long they've forgotten how to fully close them again. And she was holding a photograph at her side, pressed against her thigh, angled so he couldn't see the image. Her grip on it was white-knuckled. "You're earlier than last time," she said. He told her he was just dropping a delivery. She didn't appear to hear him. Her two wide eyes moved over him slowly, and he had the feeling of being catalogued, not looked at. Catalogued. "I always hope it'll be different," she said. "Every time. I put in the notes. I say don't knock, hoping you'll just leave it, hoping I won't have to." She stopped, pressed her lips together so hard they went white. "But you always end at the door." Darnell said he was sorry for the confusion, that he'd been about to just leave it, that the door had opened on its own. She looked at him then like he'd said something heartbreaking. "It always opens," she said quietly. "This house always opens for the driver." He should have left. He had 31 more stops. He should have smiled, said, "Have a good one," turned around, and put that street in his rear view and never thought about it again. But the way she said it, "always opens for the driver," planted something cold in the center of his chest, and he heard himself ask how many deliveries she'd been expecting. She turned then and walked back into the house, leaving the door open, and he saw, because she was no longer blocking his sightline, what was inside. Packages, brown Amazon boxes of varying sizes, stacked from floor to ceiling along every visible wall. The living room opening to his left was floor to ceiling with them, a narrow, human-width path carved through the center. They were all unopened. Every single one still sealed with their Amazon tape, hundreds of them, maybe more than 1,000. He counted the boxes visible directly in his sightline, 47. That was just what he could see. The address label on the nearest stack was facing him, and he leaned forward slightly without meaning to. The name on the label was his name, Darnell Antoine Webb, his home address in Maple Heights. The package was dated September 14, 2019. He had not lived in Maple Heights until 2021. He had not started driving for Amazon until March of 2022. He looked at the next label, his name, a different address. The apartment he'd lived in before Maple Heights, the one on Kinsman he'd rented for 18 months. Dated August 3, 2017. He looked at a third label and stopped reading after the first two words of the name, because they were his, and his hands had started to shake. "How many drivers," he said, and his voice came out smaller than he intended, "have delivered here?" She turned back from somewhere deeper in the house. Her expression hadn't changed, still that wrecked open look, still holding the photograph against her thigh. "Just the one," she said. He backed off the porch. He did not turn his back on the door. He walked backwards down the flagstone path, watched the door stay open, watched her standing in the frame with the photograph pressed against her leg. He got to his van, climbed in. His hands on the wheel were steady in the way. Hands are steady when the body has decided that panic is happening, but hasn't informed the fingers yet. He drove back up the block and did not look in his mirrors. The Flex app marked stop 41 complete. Delivered, 4-star rating. Automatic, which he knew meant the package had been scanned as received. He hadn't scanned it. He'd left the package on the porch. The app had marked it complete anyway. He finished his route. He delivered the remaining 31 stops with a precision that felt robotic, his brain running a clean parallel track that kept asking the same question and finding no answer. He ate dinner. He watched television. He went to bed at 10:15. At 11:47 p.m., his phone buzzed with an Amazon notification. "Your package has been delivered. Check your front door." He lived alone. He hadn't ordered anything. He lay in the dark for 4 minutes without moving. Then he got up and walked to his front door and stood in front of it for what felt like a very long time with his hand on the deadbolt. He told himself it was a misdirected delivery. He told himself this happened all the time, that Amazon's distribution was an enormous machine with enormous margins for error. that somebody in his building had ordered something and the driver had misread the unit number. He told himself this 7 times, each time using slightly different words. And then he turned the deadbolt and opened the door. The hallway outside his apartment was empty. No package on the mat, no package propped against the wall. Nothing. He was about to close the door when he looked down. The welcome mat, the mat he'd had since he moved in, the gray one from Target with the neutral geometric pattern. It was different now. It was dark, almost charcoal, with 3 horizontal bars of color along the bottom edge. The middle bar was a shade that sat between brown and red, and something that had no name. He did not sleep that night. He called Gerald the next morning and asked to be reassigned to a different route. Gerald said the system assigned routes automatically and he couldn't just request changes without a reason. Darnell said he had a reason. Gerald asked him what it was. He thought about what to say for a moment, then said he'd just prefer a different area. Gerald sighed and said he'd see what he could do, but no promises. 3 weeks later, on a Tuesday in early November, Darnell was assigned his usual route. Stop 41 was 7 Meridian Loop, Garfield Heights. 1 medium-sized box, 3.2 pounds, addressed to a name that was almost but not quite pronounceable. He stared at the stop for 60 seconds. Then he called Gerald and asked to have a different driver take just this one stop. Gerald said that wasn't how it worked. He drove the route. He drove it mechanically and carefully, and he got to stop 41 at 2:17 p.m., and he sat in the van outside the turn onto the block he didn't recognize for 9 minutes. 9 minutes of October light pressing warm through his windshield. 9 minutes of the flex app blinking politely. 9 minutes of silence except for the engine tick and his own breathing. Then he drove in. The house was there. White Craftsman, covered porch, curtains drawn. The flag hanging limp. Different colors this time, but still wrong in the same way. Still that unnameable middle bar. He parked. He got out. He walked up the flagstone path and set the package on the mat and stood up to take the photo. This time he made it 2 steps back down the path before the door opened. Different woman. Younger. Maybe 45. Dark hair. Same yellow house dress. Same 2 wide eyes. She was holding a photograph against her thigh. "You're earlier than last time," she said. His hand stopped shaking around stop 58. He delivered the rest of his route. He ate dinner. He watched television. He went to bed. At 11:47 p.m., his phone buzzed with a notification. "Your package has been delivered. Check your front door." He did not get up. He lay in the dark and listened to the sound of the hallway outside his door for a very long time. At some point he slept. In the morning the notification was still on his phone. He cleared it without reading it again. He quit Amazon Flex 6 days later. Told Gerald he was going back to school. Gerald wished him well and said to look him up if he ever wanted to come back. He said he wouldn't be coming back. He moved to a new apartment 4 months after that. Different building, different neighborhood, different mat. He bought a plain one, solid beige, no pattern. He still checks it every night before he goes to bed. He has checked it every single night for the past 2 years. Just a quick look right before he turns off the lights, just to make sure the color is right, just to make sure the bars haven't appeared. Most nights the mat is fine. He doesn't know what he'll do on the night it isn't. Story number 2. What Margaret ordered. The smell hit Kayla before she reached the porch steps. Not garbage, not mildew, not rot, not any of the normal smells of a neglected house. Something older and denser than any of those, like the inside of a building that had been sealed for 50 years and was exhaling for the first time. Organic. Ancient. Faintly sweet in a way that turned her stomach immediately. She'd been standing on the cracked concrete walkway of 1314 Bellwether Street in Columbus, Ohio for approximately 4 seconds, holding 2 medium packages, and already her body was running quiet alarms. This happened maybe twice a year on the job. Houses that felt wrong from outside. Her body was rarely wrong. She'd learned to trust it. The house was a craftsman bungalow that had once been white. The paint was now the color of old teeth. The yard was not overgrown in a normal neglected way, but in a specific, dense way, like something was growing faster than normal. Climbing the porch railings, threading through the lattice below the porch boards, pushing through cracks in the walkway around her feet. Not weeds exactly, She wasn't sure what it was. The leaves were small and dark, almost black-green, and they had an oily quality, like they'd catch light differently from any angle. The customer notes on her app said, "Please leave all packages inside the storm door if possible. If the storm door is locked, leave at door as usual. Thank you, Margaret." Kayla had delivered to this address 4 times in the past 3 weeks. Always 2 packages, occasionally 3. She'd never seen Margaret. She'd never needed to. Storm door was always unlocked. She tucked the packages inside, snapped the photo, moved on. Easy stop, 30 seconds max. But today the storm door was hanging open at an awkward angle. Not latched properly, not swinging free, just open and slightly crooked, like someone had opened it hard and it had stuck on a warp in the frame. Through the outer door she could see the inner door was open too. Dark gap of interior visible, which was new. In 11 months of deliveries in Columbus, not once had she made a stop where both doors were standing open. That was a thing people didn't do. That was a thing that said something was wrong inside. She almost marked it as attempted delivery and left. Her hand was literally on her scanner. She was this close. Instead, she called out, "Hello? Amazon delivery? I have 2 packages?" Silence from inside. A truck somewhere down the street. The peculiar scratching sound of those black-green leaves on the porch railing, though there was no wind. "Margaret, I'm just going to leave these inside the door." She went up the steps, stepped onto the porch. The smell intensified. That sealed room, aged sweetness that pressed against her sinuses like thumbs. She leaned through the storm door and placed the 2 packages on the interior welcome mat without crossing the threshold. Straightened up, pulled her phone out to take the confirmation photo. Through the finder, she saw what was behind the packages on the floor of the entry hall. Packages. Brown Amazon boxes. Same as every house in America. Same as a million other doorsteps. Except these were old. The cardboard on the ones she could see immediately had gone dark with age. Gone limp and soft at the corners the way cardboard does after years of absorbing ambient humidity. The Amazon tape was still sealed on every one. They were all unopened. They were stacked in precarious towers that reached above head height, filling the visible entry hall. And beyond them she could see, barely, the beginning of the living room, which appeared to be similarly full. She took the photo anyway, got back in her van, marked the stop complete. She looked up the address in her order history for the route on her phone, which you weren't really supposed to do with personal data, but which the Flex app allowed you to access for your own active route. She had delivered to a 1315 Bellwether Street on October 3rd, October 9th, October 14th, and today, October 21st. In all 4 visits, she placed the packages inside the storm door and never interacted with the occupant. She drove the rest of her route and tried not to think about the towers of boxes, tried not to do the math on how many there were, how long it would take to accumulate that many, who was ordering all of it, and why nothing was being opened. She didn't stop thinking about it. She Googled the address that evening. Nothing informative, just property records. The house had been purchased in 1987 by a Margaret Eloise Voss. She found no social media, no obituary, no news mentions, just a name attached to an old property record and a tax payment history that ran clean up to the current year, meaning someone was still paying the bills. She told herself it wasn't her business. Some people hoarded. Some people had problems. It wasn't her job to evaluate the mental health of recipients. Her job was to deliver and move on. 3 days later, she had Bellwether Street again. Stop 27. 1 package this time, plus an Amazon Fresh bag of groceries, which told her definitively that someone was alive and functional inside that house. You didn't order groceries if you weren't eating. She parked, grabbed both items, and went up the walk. The storm door was closed today, latched properly. She pulled it open, placed the grocery bag and the package just inside, and was reaching for her phone when she heard the sound. Footsteps. From directly above her, upstairs, moving at a slow, deliberate circuit, back and forth like pacing. The floor was old wood, and each step landed with a clean, heavy creak. She could count them. She counted 12 steps. A pause. 12 steps back. 12 steps. Pause. 12 steps back. She got the photo and left faster than she meant to. The next week, she pulled up the full delivery history for that address, using a workaround her friend, who'd been a driver longer than her, had shown her, not strictly inside the terms of the Flex agreement, but technically possible using the app's receipt lookup function if you had the right inputs. What she found stopped her in the parking lot of a McDonald's with a large coffee going cold in her cuff holder. 117 deliveries to 114 Bellwether Street. Not in the past year. Not since the current delivery station opened. Total logged deliveries in the system since the digital record began. 117 packages, some from as far back as 2013 when the Columbus delivery station had opened, and Amazon had begun keeping detailed digital logs. Not one of them had ever been returned. Not one had ever generated a customer service complaint or failed delivery flag. Every single one logged as successfully delivered. She did the math on the stack she'd seen in that entry hall, tried to estimate square footage and box volume, even accounting for a living room and kitchen and upstairs floor of similar density. 117 boxes over 10 years would not fill a house to the ceiling. It wasn't physically possible unless the house was somehow larger than it appeared from outside, unless the boxes were somehow smaller than standard, unless she'd badly misjudged what she'd seen through the finder screen. She delivered to Bellwether Street for the next 6 weeks, once or twice a week, sometimes more. The storm door was always accessible. She was never required to interact with Margaret. But she started paying attention, started noticing the details she'd been sliding past. The grocery orders were always the same, specific, almost ritualistic. Chicken stock, dried rosemary, sea salt, 24 eggs, a specific brand of black tea that she'd had to look up because she didn't recognize it. Lapsang Souchong, heavily smoked, Russian origin. Every single grocery delivery identical. Same items, same quantities. Ordered on a 12 to 14 day cycle like clockwork. The regular packages were less consistent. Different sizes, different weights. She began, against every professional instinct she possessed, photographing the shipping labels before she left them inside the door, taking an extra photo, not for Amazon, but for herself. Just the label, quick enough that the stop timer wouldn't flag her. She spent 3 evenings entering the merchant codes into Google. Of the 34 packages she'd tracked over 6 weeks, 11 were from industrial chemical supply companies. 4 were from medical supply wholesalers. 7 were from taxidermy suppliers. 5 were from companies that appeared to sell antique paper goods and archival storage materials. 3 were from a single company in rural Tennessee that had no website she could find, no Google presence, no BBB listing. Just a name, Alderton Correspondence and Form Supply. She looked up Alderton Correspondence and Form Supply for 3 days before she found a single reference to it, a forum post from 2009 on a collector's website, someone asking if anyone had experience with the company, saying they'd received an unsolicited catalog in the mail and found the contents disturbing and wanted to know if others had encountered it. No responses. Post still live, untouched for 15 years. The last week of November, she made what would be her final delivery to Bellwether Street. It was a Friday, late afternoon, the sky going purple-orange with an early winter sunset. 2 packages in the grocery bag. She went up the walk, pulled the storm door, placed the items inside. The inner door was open 3 inches. She could see through the gap into the hallway beyond the entry area. The towers of boxes she'd seen in October were still there, but they'd changed. Someone had opened them. Not all of them, maybe a third, maybe a quarter. The opened ones had their flaps turned back neatly, not torn or ripped, but opened with care, with a box cutter or scissors, opened and the contents removed. Whatever had been inside was not visible, just open boxes like split chrysalises. And the floor between the towers, the narrow human-width path she'd noted back in October, the floor of that path had something on it. Not furniture, not boxes. Something spread across the floor, taking up the full width of the path as far as she could see in the fading light. It took her 6 seconds to understand what she was looking at. Paper. Sheets of paper, spread across the floor in overlapping layers, edge to edge, every inch covered. And on the paper, in very small, very precise handwriting, text, dense columns of text. written in black ink, filling every inch of every page, covering the floor from wall to wall, running back into the dark of the hallway beyond what she could see. She raised her phone without deciding to. The gap in the door snapped shut. Not slammed, just closed, quick and final, with a soft click. She stood on the threshold for 4 seconds with her phone up and her heart destroying itself inside her chest. Then she got the delivery photo, marked the stop, and walked back to her van on legs that she willed to be steady. She quit the Columbus route that weekend, transferred to a Worthington station working the north suburbs. Different neighborhoods, different streets. She told herself she was ready for a change. She has never gone back to Bellwether Street. She has never attempted to find out what was written on those pages. She has never tried to learn if Margaret Eloise Voss is still alive. What she does know, what she cannot stop knowing, is this: 117 packages in 10 years of digital records. But the property was purchased in 1987. Amazon didn't exist in 1987. Digital records didn't begin until 2013. She has never wanted to know what arrived at that house in the 26 years before anyone was keeping count. Story number 3. Building C, 4th floor. The elevator only went to 3. Theo noticed it on his second delivery to Carver Commons, a mid-rise apartment complex off MLK Boulevard in Denver, that showed up on his routes about once a week. The elevator had buttons for L1, 2, and 3, no 4. He'd been going up to apartment 4F for 2 months before it registered, because he'd always taken the stairs automatically. The way drivers learn to avoid elevators on tight routes. Stairs were faster. Stairs were reliable. Stairs didn't trap you in a metal box with armloads of packages while the clock ran. He'd walked up 4 flights to 4F, dropped the package, walked back down, never thought about the buttons. Then one afternoon in late January, he was running behind, slicker roads than predicted. 3 failed scans that had eaten 20 minutes, and he'd decided to take the elevator as a shortcut, thinking it would be faster. He pressed 4, nothing happened. He pressed it again, looked at the panel, saw the top button was 3. He stood in the elevator for a moment, pressed 3, rode up to the 3rd floor, got out, confirmed that the hallway was labeled with a 3, confirmed that apartment 3F and 3G and all the 3rd floor apartments were right there. Then he took the stairwell door at the end of the hallway and climbed 1 more flight and came out onto a 4th floor hallway, exactly like the others, and walked to 4F and knocked. The door opened, and the man who answered it was tall and pale with a clean-shaven face and extraordinarily light gray eyes, almost white, and he was wearing a bathrobe even though it's 2:30 in the afternoon. He looked at Theo with an expression that was not unfriendly, but was somehow oriented wrong, like a person who had learned to perform normalcy through watching rather than living. Finally, the man said. Theo told him he had a delivery for the apartment. The man said he knew. He took the package and went back inside, and the door closed without another word. The package had been for a name Theo didn't catch before the door shut. He checked his scanner. The name logged on, stop 33, was Felix Marrow. He marked it delivered and went back downstairs and didn't think about the elevator buttons again for another 3 weeks. 3 weeks later, late February, he was back at Carver Commons for the first time since then. 1 stop. 4F. He took the stairs out of habit and got to the 4th floor hallway and froze. The hallway was wrong. Not dramatically wrong. Not like the walls were bleeding or the doors were floating. Just wrong in a quiet, deniable way. The hallway at Carver Commons was carpeted in a utilitarian industrial blue-gray, the kind every apartment complex bought by the 1,000 yards. The walls were painted a standard rental off-white. The light fixtures were standard flush-mount ceiling units. He had been in this hallway at least a dozen times, but the carpet was a different shade. Not dramatically different, just slightly darker, slightly redder. More burgundy than blue. And the fixtures above, same style, same placement, had a slightly warmer bulb in them, throwing a yellower light. These were not things he would have noticed if he hadn't stood in this exact hallway repeatedly. They were not things he could prove from a photo. He walked to 4F. The door opened, different person. A woman this time, mid-40s, dark hair pulled back, wearing street clothes rather than a bathrobe. She had the same light gray eyes as the man from before. Almost white, she looked at him with the same expression, not unfriendly, oriented wrong. Finally, she said. He told her he had a delivery for Felix Marrow. She tilted her head slowly to one side, like an animal hearing a sound it doesn't recognize. Is that what you're calling him? She said. It wasn't a question. He told her it was the name on the package. She took it, closed the door. He went back to his van and sat for 3 minutes. Gray eyes, same word. Finally, he thought about all the ways two people could use the same expression. Relief at the end of a wait, annoyance at a late arrival. Just idiom, just coincidence. He pulled up the order history for 4F. His route app only showed him his own stops, but he'd been doing this long enough to recognize patterns. He'd personally delivered to 4F 7 times since starting this route in December. Same unit, packages addressed to Felix Marrow. One time the man with the white eyes had answered. Every other time no one home, package left at door. He went back inside and buzzed the building manager. The intercom crackled and a tired female voice answered, and he said he had a delivery question, which was his standard opener when he needed to ask a building something. He asked if there was a 4th floor, apologizing for the weird question, explaining the elevator only showed 3. The building manager was quiet for a moment, and then said there were 3 floors. He said he was pretty sure he'd just been on the 4th. She said Carver Commons was a 3-story building. She said it clearly, and with the particular tone of someone who is running out of patience for a confusing conversation. He said thank you. Walked back to the stairs. Opened the stairwell door, 3 floors. The stairwell went up 2 flights from the lobby level, each landing clearly marked. The top landing was labeled 3. He stood at the top landing and looked up. No 4th floor, no door above him. Just the ceiling of the stairwell with a light fixture and a sprinkler head. He had delivered 7 packages to a floor of a 3-story building that was not a 4-story building. He had spoken to 2 people on a floor that did not exist. He had scans. He had confirmation photos of the door, the doormat, the delivered package. He had GPS data placing him at that building, on that floor, at those times. He stood in the stairwell at the top landing for a long time. Then he went back down to the lobby level and looked at the elevator panel one more time. L123. He pressed 3, rode up, got out on a correct 3rd floor with the correct blue-gray carpet and the correct cool white lighting. He walked the length of the hallway, rooms 3A through 3H, all correct, all matching his memory of the building. He went back to the stairwell, went up 1 flight, came out onto the 4th floor with the burgundy carpet and the warm yellow light, and the door marked 4F at the far end. He stood at the 4th floor landing and looked back at the stairwell below him. From up here, the 3rd floor landing was visible, 1 flight down. Below that, the lobby landing. The stairwell worked. He could reach the 4th floor from the 3rd floor by stairs. He just could not get to the 4th floor from the lobby on the elevator. He walked to 4F. Did not knock, did not deliver anything. He'd already completed his stop. Just stood in front of the door for a moment. The door was solid. The number plaque was solid. Metal. 4 and a capital F, screwed into the wood. He touched it. Metal. Real. From behind the door, clearly, without ambiguity, a voice said, "We can hear you out there." It was the man's voice. Gray eyes, pale, bathrobe, at 2:30 in the afternoon. Then the woman's voice. "He's been coming for 2 months. Then a third voice, younger, maybe a child, saying, "Is he staying this time?" Then silence. Then, after a pause long enough to make him hold his breath, all 3 voices, together, in perfect unison, with a kind of rote precision that suggested a thing practiced rather than felt. Finally, he went downstairs. He drove the rest of his route. He performed each stop with his usual efficiency, scanning, photographing, moving on. At stop 48, he photographed a package at a doorstep and checked the image on his phone, and the image showed, in the background of the photo visible through the window of his van parked in the frame, A man standing in the road behind his van, pale, gray eyes, bathrobe. He turned around. The road was empty. He flagged the photo as corrupted and didn't use it for the delivery confirmation. Used a second photo he took immediately after. In the second photo, the road behind his van was clear. He has not returned to Carver Commons. He is not sure if the building has 3 floors or 4. He is not sure if Felix Merrow is a real person. He is certain that if he ever goes back, the door to 4F will open before he knocks, and the 3 of them will be standing inside with their white-gray eyes, and at least one of them will say the word that he can no longer hear without his hands going cold. He is certain that the third voice, the child's voice, was not there the first time. He had 2 voices before and 3 voices the last time. He does not know what that progression means. He suspects, with a particular flavor of sick certainty that visits him sometimes at 3 a.m., that it means something is growing in apartment 4F, that it is collecting something, that it has been collecting it stop by stop, delivery by delivery since before he ever walked up those stairs. He has dreams sometimes where he's on the 4th floor and he opens 4F and counts the figures inside. He never makes it to the final number before he wakes up. He thinks that might be Marcy. Story number 4, the photo proof. Every delivery required a photo. That was the whole deal. You pulled up, scanned the package, took a picture of it, placed at the door, uploaded it, moved on. The photo was proof. The photo was protection. If a customer claimed non-delivery, you had the photo. If there was a dispute, you had the photo. Amazon's system was built on the photo. Renata had been doing this for 14 months, and she trusted the photo. She trusted it completely. That trust ended on a Thursday in September. Stop 55 on her Columbus suburban route was a colonial on a quiet cul-de-sac off Sycamore Ridge Drive in a cookie-cutter subdivision called Heritage Glen Estates, where every house was the same, 3 variations in rotation, and the lawns were kept by the same lawn service, and the mailboxes were the same black wrought iron from the same HOA-approved catalog. She'd been to this neighborhood dozens of times. Standard residential delivery. She pulled up to the house. Beige siding, burgundy shutters, attached 2-car garage, ring doorbell with the blue light indicating it was active. Left the package and took the photo from the standard position. Step back 4 feet, frame the front door, get the package visible on the mat, get the house number visible above the door if possible. She uploaded it, moved on. At stop 62, she checked her upload log out of habit, the way she always did once she'd cleared the neighborhood. All photos uploaded cleanly. She scrolled through the thumbnails to confirm and paused on stop 55. In the photo, the package was on the mat. The door was visible. The house number was visible. All correct. But in the window to the right of the door, the large front window with the blinds drawn, the blinds she'd noticed as closed when she'd been at the door. The blinds were open in the photo, just an inch, maybe 2. A gap at the bottom. And in the gap, pressed against the glass from inside, was a hand. The shot was wide enough that the hand was small, not a dominant feature, easy to miss in a quick scroll. She'd missed it on the thumbnail, but zoomed in, it was unmistakable, breast flat against the inside of the glass, fingers spread, palm down. An adult hand, pale, with the particular stillness of something that was not waving or reaching, but simply present, simply making itself visible. She zoomed in further, past the hand, into the darkness of the room behind the glass. It was hard to make out. The image resolution degraded past a certain point, but she could see a shape in the darkness behind the hand, a vertical shape, and 2 lighter areas in the upper portion of that shape that might have been eyes. And the shape was not standing at the window but back, several feet back, so that the hand pressed to the glass was extended forward with the arm fully stretched, and whatever the hand was attached to was standing in the dark at a distance, reaching. She put the phone down. She was driving, and she put the phone down, and kept her eyes on the road for the next several blocks, because she was a careful driver, always had been, and the image was already in her head, fully formed, and did not require the screen to persist. At stop 67, she checked the photo again. The hand was still there. She wasn't going to convince herself it wasn't. She delivered the rest of her route, went home, ate dinner, did not look at the photo again that night. The next morning she had a different route, different quadrant of the city. No Heritage Glen estates. She worked her route normally and didn't think about the photo with the consistent effort of a person actively working not to think about something. 4 days later she had Heritage Glen again, same cul-de-sac, same beige colonial, stop 49. One package. She drove past the turn 3 times, each time telling herself she'd do it on the next pass, before finally pulling down the cul-de-sac on the 3rd circuit and parking in front of the house. It looked identical to every other time she'd seen it. Blinds drawn in the front window, Ring doorbell, blue active light, attached garage. She got the package and walked up the path, set it on the mat, stood up to take the photo. She took the photo, checked it immediately. Package on the mat. Door visible. House number visible. House number visible. Blinds closed. No hand. She exhaled. Scrolled back to the stop 55 photo from 4 days ago. Zoomed in on the window. Different hand this time. She had not touched the photo since the night of the delivery. The original photo should have been exactly as she'd left it. But the hand in the window was different now. 4 days ago, it had been a right hand, palm down, fingers spread. Now, in the same photo, in the same window, it was a left hand, angled differently, and 2 of the fingers were bent in a way that read, unmistakably, as pointing directly at the camera, directly at her. She stepped back from the door of the beige colonial and looked up at the front window. Blinds closed. Blue line at the Ring doorbell. Everything normal. She looked at her photo of today's delivery. No hand. Looked at the archived photo from 4 days ago. Left hand pointing at the camera. She submitted a complaint through the Amazon Driver app's safety reporting system that evening, a system she had used once before to report a dog that had genuinely attempted to remove a piece of her leg in Westerville. The form asked for the nature of the concern. She typed, "I believe there may be someone in distress at this address." She included the original photo. Zoomed in on the window. She received an automated response within 20 minutes thanking her for her report. 3 days later, she received a follow-up email informing her that the matter had been reviewed and no further action was required. 2 weeks after that, she had Heritage Glen again. The package for the beige colonial was in her load. Stop 38. She delivered it, took the photo, uploaded it, moved on. That evening, checking her log from force of habit, she found the photo and opened it and examined the front window of the house. Blinds closed, no hand visible. She zoomed in as far as the image would allow and found nothing. She was about to close the app when she noticed the doorstep. The package was there, as photographed. The mat was there, the door was there. But the floor of the covered porch, the space between the mat and the top porch step, had something on it that she hadn't noticed when she was standing on the porch. A shadow. Specifically, the shadow of something standing directly behind her when she'd taken the photo, standing close enough that its shadow fell onto the porch ahead of her. She zoomed in on the shadow. It was clearly humanoid. The proportions were strange, the limbs too long, the head too wide. But it was bipedal and it was upright, and it was standing approximately 4 feet behind where she'd been standing when she pressed the shutter. She had been alone on that porch. She had been alone in that driveway. She had looked back when she left, the way she always did. One last scan before returning to the van, and there had been nothing behind her. She deleted the photo, submitted the stop under the secondary image she always took as a backup. The backup showed the package on the mat, the empty porch, no shadow. She still has the deleted photo. Phones keep deleted photos for 30 days before permanent removal, and she has been restoring it to her regular album and re-deleting it every 28 days for the past 6 months. Like a ritual she can't stop performing. She looks at the shadow every time before she deletes it. She has tried to find an explanation for the proportions, for the wide head, for the length of the limbs. She has not found one. What she has found, while going through old delivery confirmation photos from the past 14 months, looking for anything she might have missed, is that the shadow appears in 41 other photographs, not only from Heritage Glen, from 7 different addresses across her routes, 41 separate stops over 14 months. the shadow standing behind her, always between 3 and 5 feet back, always cast forward onto the surface in front of her, always with the same impossible limb proportions. She has been looking at these photos since March. She has still not gotten used to them. What she has gotten used to, what she cannot shake, is the specific knowledge that in 41 photos across 14 months, she was never alone, that it was always there, that it began before she ever noticed the hand in the window, that her noticing it did not change anything about its behavior, that it was there regardless of whether she looked. She doesn't know if it still follows her. She stopped taking personal photos. She stopped looking at the delivery confirmation images after upload. She thinks that's probably the right call. She thinks not knowing is safer than knowing. She is not entirely sure that she believes that. Story number 5. What was ordered on Route 9? Miles had been doing rural routes in central Georgia for 3 years when he got the order. Rural routes were their own category of difficulty. The roads were long and the addresses were sometimes creative, and the GPS had an adversarial relationship with properties that had been carved out of farmland before street numbering systems existed. You learned to read the land. You learned to find a mailbox half swallowed by kudzu at the end of a gravel road and understand it as a legitimate address. You learn to drive slowly past the 7th unmarked fence post on County Road 44 and recognize it as the access point for a residence half a mile back on an unimproved track. Miles was good at this. He had the patience for it that a lot of drivers didn't. So when the Flex app routed him to a stop on Route 9 with an address flag he hadn't seen before, a small orange triangle in the corner, the stop detail, which he'd later learn was a system notation for rural delivery, extended travel time. He didn't sweat it. He finished the preceding 17 stops, pulled onto Route 9 heading southwest, and followed the blue line. The blue line took him 11.4 miles down Route 9 before signaling a right turn onto what turned out to be a gravel track, barely wide enough for his delivery van. He turned in, watched the trees close behind him on both sides, and drove. The track was in decent shape, better maintained than a lot of the access roads out here. Gravel packed and even, and showing signs of regular use. Tire tracks not overgrown. A culvert over the drainage ditch at the entrance that looked maintained. Someone drove this road regularly. At the end of the track, 3/4 of a mile in, was a house. He delivered to farmhouses before, was prepared for the aesthetics of rural Georgia residential. But this house stopped him in a way that had nothing to do with aesthetics. It was large, 2 stories, old wood frame construction, white paint that had gone gray, 6 windows visible on the front face, a covered wraparound porch. It was structurally sound from what he could see, no obvious collapse risk, no boarded windows. It was maintained, or had been maintained until recently. The grass of the front yard was cut but long. The porch appeared swept. The driveway circle in front of the house held 2 vehicles, a green pickup truck that looked recently washed, and a white sedan of ambiguous vintage. Cars meant people home. People home on a Wednesday afternoon in rural Georgia on a property this far back from the road meant either retirement or self-employment or something he didn't need to categorize. He pulled the van up, parked in the circle, and checked his scanner for the stop details. The package was large. He'd loaded it at the station that morning. A 48-pound box, the kind that required the dolly, and he'd known he'd need to remember where it was in the load, because the big heavy ones always complicated rear access. The recipient name was Elvin Pruitt. 1 stop, 1 package. He got the dolly, loaded the box, wheeled it across the packed dirt driveway to the porch steps. 3 steps up to the porch. He managed them with the dolly tilted back and steady, crossed the porch boards, which were solid and didn't flex, and knocked on the front door. The smell hit him as he raised his hand to knock. He was close enough to the door that the first knock was already in progress, and he couldn't pull it back without it seeming strange. So he knocked twice and then stood there with the smell wrapping around him and tried to identify it. He couldn't. It was compound, multiple layers, a chemical smell underneath, sharp and industrial, and over it something else that he associated with butcher shops and processing facilities, not strong enough to be alarming at distance. But on the porch with the afternoon heat pressing down, and no breeze under the porch roof, it was enough to make him take a step back toward the porch steps. The door opened before he'd completed the step. The man who answered was maybe 60, built broad, wearing work clothes that were clean but stiff, the way clothes are when they've been washed but not with any kind of softener. His face was weathered and calm and deeply, entirely unremarkable. He looked like 1,000 other rural Georgia men of his age and general description. He looked at Miles and at the package on the dolly, and nodded once. "You can leave it right there," he said, nodding at the porch floor beside the door. Miles said he'd need a signature for a package this size. Company policy on heavy packages. Not strictly true. He'd been told this by a driver who'd been doing rural routes longer than him, and it had always worked to avoid arguments about porch placement versus door placement. The man said he understood and produced from somewhere, pocket, the interior darkness beyond the door, a pen. Miles offered his scanner. The man signed with a first initial and a last name in a compact, legible hand. E. Pruitt. Miles stood the box upright beside the door, got his scanner back, prepared to take the confirmation photo. "Long drive out here," the man said, conversational, mild. Miles agreed it was a ways. He framed the shot on his phone. The box, the door, the porch, the house number above the door frame. "We appreciate it," the man said. "Take some doing, getting things out this far." Miles said it was no trouble. His eye, in the phone's camera frame, tracked left along the wraparound porch, which extended around the side of the house into the side yard. At the edge of his camera frame, at the point where the porch turned the corner, he could see the corner of a large structure. Not the house, something separate, behind and to the side of the house, maybe 50 yards back. A building of some kind, metal roof, industrial scale. He pressed the shutter. "Got the photo. We go through a lot of supplies," the man said, almost to himself, looking at the box with something that was contentment rather than excitement. "A thing expected and received. Always have." Miles said he let him get to it. Moved the dolly off the porch, down the steps, back toward the van. The man watched from the door without moving. Back in the van, Miles uploaded the confirmation photo and looked at it on his screen before pulling out. Standard shot. Box, door, house number. To the left edge of the frame. The corner of the porch where it turned. And visible just past that turn. He'd caught more of the side yard than he'd realized. The structure behind the house was partially visible. Metal walls, large sliding door on a track, the kind on agricultural outbuildings. The sliding door was open. Inside, in the shadows cut through with bars of light from the corrugated roofline, he could see shapes. Large shapes. Vertical shapes. They were hanging. He zoomed in. The image, degraded at that zoom level, became approximate. But the shapes were consistent and their arrangement was clear. They were hung at intervals from the ceiling of the building on hooks. The way processed meat hangs in a cold room, they were roughly human-shaped, in that they were roughly the right size and tapered at the right places. They were pale and irregular, and the bars of light running through the building gave them a washed, clinical quality. He put the van in drive and left. He did not allow himself to think about it for the 11.4 miles back to Route 9. He drove Route 9 for 40 minutes to the next rural stop and delivered it and delivered the next 9 stops and did not think about what he'd seen in the photo. That evening, he looked at the photo again with his laptop and the best zoom he could manage. The shapes inside the building were consistent with the interpretation he'd first formed, consistent with, not confirmed as. The image quality at that distance and zoom was not confirmatory. They could have been something else. Something industrial, some equipment or material he wasn't familiar with. Rural Georgia had industries he didn't know. He was an Amazon driver, not a farmer, not a processor, not anyone with particular expertise in agricultural outbuildings. He filed the photo, kept it, did not report it because he had nothing to report. He had a blurry background element in a delivery confirmation photo. He had a smell that was unpleasant. He had a large package of unspecified contents to a man in a rural property with outbuildings. None of that was anything. None of that was a report. He checked the Amazon order details for the stop 3 days later, using the same receipt lookup method others before him on different routes had used. The package contents, listed in the standard merchant description field, read, Preservation materials, bulk, professional grade. QTY, 1 case, 48 pounds. He looked at that for a while. He thought about the word preservation. He thought about the hanging shapes and the clinical light and the compound smell on the porch. He thought about the man saying, "We go through a lot of supplies," the plural. We. He had seen only one man. Both vehicles suggested at least two residents. He had not seen or heard any evidence of a second person in or around the house. He's not been assigned Route 9 since. He doesn't know if that's random or if the system rotates naturally, or if something about his interaction with Stop 42 flagged a review and resulted in reassignment. He hasn't asked Gerald, a different Gerald, his DSP dispatcher in Georgia, because asking would require explaining, and explaining would require saying things out loud that he has been very carefully not saying out loud. What he thinks about, with the specific quality of thoughts that return at unwanted hours, is the merchant. He has looked up the merchant code from the order a dozen times. It resolves to a company in South Carolina he cannot find any public information about. Their product category on Amazon's seller platform is listed, simply, cleanly, without qualification, as mortuary and memorial supplies. He has not ordered anything from Amazon since October. He is aware this is irrational. He is aware that the categories of goods sold on that platform are enormous and varied, and that his not ordering does not change what is sold, or who buys it, or what they use it for. He still doesn't order. He still doesn't know what was in that box. He still thinks about the hanging shapes in the agricultural building on the property of a man who uses preservation materials by the 48-pound case and lives alone on a gravel track in the rural Georgia heat. He still thinks about the word we. Story number 6. The court addressed. It was a misdirected package. That happened. The scanners sometimes pulled wrong labels from close proximity stacks in the van. GPS occasionally had address dyslexia on streets with similar names. Customers entered shipping addresses slightly wrong, and Amazon system auto-corrected to the nearest plausible match. It was a standard occurrence, a mundane failure in a giant machine, and Priya had handled missed deliveries dozens of times. You realized the error. You retrieved the package if possible. You redirected. No drama. The error on October 31st, which she would later think was either a coincidence or the most heavy-handed irony of her life, was straightforward on its face. The package addressed to 1882 Garland Avenue had been delivered to 1882 Garland Court. Different streets, both in the northeast corner of Indianapolis, close enough in her route's geography that the app had not flagged it as unusual. She'd left the package at the Garland Court address, taken her photo, moved on, and not discovered the error until the customer on Garland Avenue called in a missing package that evening, and a routing review flagged the discrepancy to her dispatcher. She went back the next morning to retrieve it. This was her idea. The dispatcher said they could send a recovery team, but Priya was already on a route in that quadrant the next day and offered to handle it herself. She had the customer's permission documentation on her app and the dispatcher's authorization to retrieve and redeliver. Garland Court was a residential street in a quiet neighborhood, older homes, established trees, the particular atmosphere of a neighborhood that had been middle class for 60 years and had settled into a comfortable lack of pretension. She found 1882, a green 2-story colonial with a wide covered porch, matching the photo she'd taken the previous day, parked, and walked up to the door with her scanner and the authorization code on her phone. The door opened as she stepped onto the porch. This happened. People had Ring cameras, smart doorbells, motion sensors. They knew you were there before you knocked. A woman stood in the doorway, maybe mid-50s, with a neat dark bob going silver at the temples, and a cardigan the color of dried leaves. She was unremarkable. Pleasant, the kind of face you immediately associate with PTA meetings and book clubs and Thanksgiving dinners that run long because everyone is genuinely happy to be there. "I'm so sorry," Priya said. "I delivered a package here yesterday by mistake. It was meant for a different address. I have authorization to retrieve it if—" "Oh, I know," the woman said. Smiled. "I was expecting you. Come in." Priya said she didn't need to come in. She just needed the package. She could wait at the door. "It's inside," the woman said. "I moved it out of the rain. Come in and I'll get it. It'll take 2 seconds." The porch roof had been dry. There had been no rain. It had been a dry, overcast November morning. Priya had been in 7 other properties that morning and none of them had mentioned rain, but the woman had already stepped back from the door and disappeared into the house in a way that assumed compliance, and Priya, who later described it as feeling like someone had moved her feet for her, stepped across the threshold. The interior of the house was warm, the specific warmth of a home where someone has been baking, which struck Priya immediately, because the smell was exactly right. Something with cinnamon, something yeast-based, a warm, dense bread smell that was so precisely evocative of domestic comfort that it seemed engineered, like the smell of a candle, rather than actual baking. She stopped inside the door. The living room opened to her right. Fully furnished, tidy, photographs on the walls in orderly groupings, a family house. She looked at the photographs because she couldn't help it. The nearest one, directly to her right, showed a family of 4. The woman she'd just spoken to, a man she assumed was a husband, 2 children, maybe 8 and 12. Normal family photo, the kind taken at a photography studio with a neutral gradient background. They were all looking at the camera except for the younger child, who was turned slightly to the side, looking at something outside the frame to the left. The child's expression. She told herself she was reading this wrong, that she was already primed to find things wrong, that she was in a normal house on a normal street, and a normal woman had just let her in. But the child's expression was the specific expression of someone who doesn't know they're being photographed, and doesn't know how to perform normalcy, and has been caught in an unguarded moment displaying something they would ordinarily conceal. The expression, unguarded and clean and captured mid-breath by an unwitting camera, was terror. "Here we are," the woman said, coming back from a room further in with the Amazon package under one arm. She held it out with a smile. Priya took it and said thank you, turned back to the door, reached for the handle. "You know you're the 4th one," the woman said. Priya stopped, turned back. "It was delivered to the wrong house," she clarified. Her smile was unchanged. "In the past 2 years, you're the 4th Amazon driver who's misdelivered here by accident. Funny, isn't it? The system sends you all the same wrong address." Priya said it was a strange coincidence. "I always invite them in," the woman said. "It's only polite. You've come all this way, made an effort. The least I can do is offer you a minute's rest." She tilted her head slightly. "They usually stay a while. Not you, though. You're in a hurry." Priya said she had a full route today, yes. Of course. The smile again, that perfectly calibrated warmth. "That's okay. You'll come back." It wasn't a prediction. It was the casual declaration of a person who already knew the outcome of a thing, was simply narrating it. Priya said she had to go. "They all say that," the woman said, the first time. The front door opened normally. She stepped out, walked to the van, drove away without looking back because she'd told herself she wasn't going to look back, and she kept that promise for 1 block exactly. Before her eyes moved involuntarily to the rear view, the woman was on the porch, standing at the top step, hands folded in front of her, watching the van. Next to her was a man, the man from the photo in the living room she assumed, and on the other side of the man, partially obscured by the porch column, were 2 children. All 4 were standing in a row watching. All 4 perfectly still. She lost sight of them on the turn. She delivered her route. When she got home that evening, she looked up the address, 1882 Garland Court, in the city's publicly available property records. The house was owned by a Douglas and Helen Mercer. Had been owned by them since 2009. She found Douglas Mercer on LinkedIn, an operations manager at an insurance company downtown. She found Helen Mercer on the website of a local garden club. 2 children, a boy and a girl, listed in a school honor roll announcement from 2 years prior. A completely documentable, completely unremarkable family. She thought about the photograph. The child turned sideways, the look of unguarded terror on a face that didn't know the camera was watching. She thought about, "You're the 4th one," about the particular comfort with which the woman had said it. She looked up the delivery error in her own records, confirmed that she had indeed misdelivered to 1882 Garland Court on October 31st. The GPS data was logged, The confirmation photo was logged. Everything squared. She ran the error analysis on the address discrepancy. The thing she had to do through her dispatcher for formal retrieval authorization, Gerald's dispatcher equivalent in Indianapolis. A woman named Trish sent her the routing log for the original error. Priya looked at it. The package had been correctly labeled, correctly addressed, 1882 Garland Avenue. The routing system had directed her to Garland Court rather than Garland Avenue. Trish's note at the bottom of the error log read, "Routing anomaly to this address previously flagged. Third occurrence in 18 months. IT ticketed for investigation. Third routing anomaly." She was the fourth driver. That tracked 3 previous wrong deliveries. 3 previous drivers who had gone to retrieve the packages. 3 previous drivers who had stepped inside the green Colonial on Garland Court and spoken to the woman in the leaf-colored cardigan and looked at the photograph on the wall. She wanted to know what happened to those 3 drivers. She wanted to call Trish and ask. She wanted to find their names in the routing log and track them down and ask them if the woman had said the same things, if they'd seen the same photo, if they'd noticed the child's face. She didn't, not because she wasn't curious, not because the need wasn't real and pressing and keeping her awake at 1 a.m. in her apartment, because she was afraid of what she'd find if she looked, because there were 3 of them before her and she was the 4th, and the woman had said, "You'll come back with that terrible certainty." And Priya had a specific fear that if she started pulling the thread, she would eventually pull it all the way to where it ended. And what was at that end was something she was not yet ready to know. She is not misdelivered to Garland Court again. She has not been routed anywhere near Garland Court again. She does not know if that's coincidence or routing or something the system adjusted. She has thought sometimes about those 3 drivers before her. She has thought about whether they stayed a while, as the woman implied. She has thought about what staying a while in that house might mean. She has thought about the baking smell that wasn't baking, about the photograph, about the child's face. She has mostly managed to stop thinking about it by the time she needs to sleep. Mostly, on the nights she can't, she lies in the dark and thinks about the word the woman used, the word that has adhered to her like something she can't wash off. Back. You'll come back. Not again, not sometime. Back. Like something that travels in a circle. Like something that doesn't stop. Story number 7. Stop 72 Boo. Jordan's shift was supposed to end at 7 p.m. He knew at stop 68 that he wasn't going to make 7. Too much ground between him and the station. Too many stops between him and home. This happened. You learn to absorb it. You learn to feel the math of a route loosening from the clean, tight shape it had at the start of the day and spreading into something shapeless and time-consuming. And you learn to breathe through it and keep moving because standing still didn't get the packages delivered. He was in the Whitmore Park neighborhood in Charlotte, North Carolina, a wealthy residential area of older established money. Large homes set back from quiet streets, the kind of streets where the houses had names in addition to numbers, and the landscaping was handled by people who arrived before sunrise in quiet trucks. He'd been to Whitmore Park before. It was pleasant work. The houses were spread out. Parking was easy. The driveways were long but even. Nobody's dog was ever loose in the yard because nobody in Whitmore Park left their dogs loose in the yard. Stop 72 was 144.99 Ashford Trace. He'd been down Ashford Trace before. He'd looked because he always looked at the street when he saw a new address, and he was certain that Ashford Trace topped out in the 14,000 range of house numbers. The highest number he could remember seeing on this street was around 14,380 or 14,380 or 14,380. But the app was clear. 144.99. Blue pin. 0.6 miles from his current position. He followed the route. Ashford Trace was a curving street with wide setbacks and old oaks making a canopy overhead. He'd done several stops on this street tonight already. He drove past the houses he recognized. 14,220, 14,260, 143,260, 14,260, 14,350, 14,382, 14,39, and kept going. The street curved. He'd never been around this particular curve. The road was the same quality, same asphalt, same canopy of oaks, no indication of anything unusual. 144.99 was there. It was the largest house on the street. That was the first thing he registered. Not dramatically larger, not a mansion in the movie sense, but larger in the way that said old money rather than new money, larger in the way of a house that had been added to thoughtfully over generations rather than built to impress. The main structure was brick, probably original 1920s or 1930s construction, with additions in matching brick extending on both sides. 5 or 6 bedrooms, minimum, detached garage set back from the main house, circular front drive. Every light in the house was on. He parked in the circle. Checked the stop details. One package, standard size, about 7 pounds. Recipient, Emmett Harlow. Customer notes field had an entry, which he almost never saw from Whitmore Park addresses. Please ring bell. We have been waiting for this delivery. He looked at that for a moment. We have been waiting. Not please ring. Not someone is home. We have been waiting. As though the act of waiting were the important information. As though the waiting were something he needed to know. He rang the bell. The door opened in under 10 seconds. A man in his 70s, perhaps early 80s, wearing a shirt and trousers and a cardigan in a deep burgundy shade that matched the color of the brick, stood in the doorway. His face was aged in the way of someone who had been very handsome and remained so. The structure still visible underneath the years. He was composed. He was expecting this. He was expecting him, specifically, in the way that went beyond I ordered a package and am waiting for the doorbell. He looked at Jordan, the way you look at someone you've been waiting a long time to see. Thank God, the man said. Come in, come in. Jordan said he was just making the delivery. He didn't need to come inside. He held out the scanner for the signature. The man took the package from him, took it, didn't just receive it. Stepped forward and took it with both hands in a kind of careful reverence that Jordan had never seen applied to an Amazon box, the way you'd receive a thing that mattered enormously, and then looked at him again. Please, the man said, just a moment, there's something I need you to understand. Jordan was in Whitmore Park on a Wednesday evening at 6:40 p.m., and the man in front of him was an elderly man in a burgundy cardigan who had just received a package with gentle reverence and was now asking him to come inside. There was nothing outwardly threatening about this. He later tried to explain this to people who asked why he didn't just leave. The arithmetic of it at that moment was genuinely benign. An old man alone in a large house. An invitation. A need to explain something. None of the standard indicators were triggering. What triggered was something underneath the standard indicators, a vibration below the threshold. He could not name it then, and could not name it later. He felt it the way you feel, a sound that's more felt than heard. He felt it, and he ignored it, and he stepped over the threshold. The interior of the house was impeccable, not sterile. Warm, furnished, lived-in walls hung with what appeared to be quality art, surfaces holding the specific objects of a life well maintained, books on shelves arranged with care, a runner on the hardwood hallway floor, the kind woven in dense patterns that had taken weeks, everything deliberate, everything in place. The man led him to a sitting room off the main hall, a fire in the fireplace though the evening wasn't cold enough to require it. 2 chairs flanking the fire with a small table between them, on which sat a glass of water and an empty second glass, as though a guest had been expected. Sit, the man said. Gently, please. Jordan sat. He later could not fully account for why, could not reconstruct the specific sequence of his own decision-making in the moment. He sat because the room said, sit, because the fire said sit, because something about the specific gravity of the place pulled him down into the chair the way a warm bath pulls you horizontal. The man sat opposite, placed the package on his knees, looked at Jordan with an expression of such profound relief that Jordan felt it in his own chest. My wife, the man said, passed 7 years ago. She was. He paused, made a small, contained gesture with one hand. She had a very particular relationship with certain objects, certain things that had meaning for her. After she passed, I lost a number of them, not to theft, not to carelessness. They simply. Another pause. Disappeared. Over a period of months. Objects with specific significance. I spent several years trying to recover them. Jordan looked at the box on the man's knees. "This is the last one," the man said. "The last piece." He opened the box, opened it with the box cutter from the table beside him. It had been there the whole time, Jordan noted, waiting, and reached inside and removed the item from its protective packaging. It was a mirror, oval, maybe 12 inches tall, in a frame of dark wood carved with a simple repeating pattern. Old, clearly, not antique in the way of a valuable collectible. Old in a different way, personal. The kind of object that accumulates meaning through decades of use rather than rarity. He held it up and looked at the face of it. Jordan looked at the mirror. In the mirror, the room was reflected. The fire. Jordan himself, sitting in the opposite chair. And behind Jordan, in the reflection, standing in the doorway to the sitting room, was a woman. She appeared to be around 50. She was wearing a dress that did not look contemporary, not dramatically out of period, but slightly, enough to register. She was looking at the mirror. Her expression was the expression of the child in the photograph at Garland Court. The expression of someone who doesn't know the camera is watching. Except the mirror wasn't a camera, and she clearly knew the mirror was there and was looking at it, not through it. Her eyes, in the mirror's reflection, met Jordan's. He turned around. The doorway was empty. He turned back. The man was holding the mirror with shaking hands, and his eyes were full of tears, and his expression was something Jordan had never seen on a human face and didn't have a word for. It was beyond happiness, beyond grief, beyond relief. It was the expression of a hunger that had been running for 7 years being met. "She's here," the man whispered. "She came back with it." His legs did it while his brain was still 3 feet behind, still sitting in the chair. He stood, and he looked one more time at the mirror in the old man's hands. And in the reflection the woman was gone, and in the reflection the room was empty, except for the old man and the empty chair, where Jordan had been sitting and the fire. He walked to the hall, to the front door. He opened it and he stepped out, and he walked to his van, and he got in, and he sat for a moment looking at the front of the house with every light burning. The old man was in the doorway, standing in the open front door, holding the mirror to his chest. The way you hold something you have been missing for 7 years, looking not at Jordan but at something slightly to Jordan's left, seeing something. His face still carrying that expression Jordan couldn't name. Jordan pulled out of the circular drive, did not look back. He finished his route. He marked Stop 72 complete. He drove back to the station, logged out, drove home. He ate dinner. He took a shower. He went to bed. He woke up at 3:15 a.m. from a dream he could not recall except for a residue of feeling, specifically the feeling of being watched from behind with full, patient attention by something that had all the time in the world. He lay in the dark. The mirror. He kept returning to the mirror, to the reflection of the empty doorway, the woman gone, the room reduced to just the old man and the empty chair, specifically the empty chair. In the reflection, the chair he'd just been sitting in had been empty, as though he'd never been there, as though the mirror did not see him. He thought about that until 4 a.m. Then he thought about something else, something that had been sitting at the back of his mind since the evening, and that he'd been managing not to fully articulate until now, in the dark, with 3:15 turning to 4:10 and the room very quiet. He had sat in that chair. The fire had been warm on his left side. He'd held his scanner in his right hand. He had been there for he wasn't sure. 6 minutes perhaps. 8, long enough for the man to open the box and remove the mirror and speak 3 paragraphs and begin to cry. In the mirror, the chair had been empty. The mirror had reflected the room. The fire, the man, the empty chair. Jordan had been sitting in that chair. The mirror had shown the room accurately. Every detail right. Furniture placed correctly. Fire burning, man sitting, except for one omission. One absence. Selective. Specific. As though it had reflected everything in the room except him. He has been thinking about what that means for 8 months. He has formed and discarded approximately 11 explanations, ranging from mirror angle and parallax errors to glass distortion, to his own misperception in a dimly lit room. None of them hold up past the 3 a.m. threshold. None of them account for the woman in the doorway who'd looked at him through the mirror's reflection with complete recognition in her eyes. None of them account for the chair, shown precisely and accurately in every detail, with no one sitting in it. He still drives the Charlotte routes. He has driven down Ashford Trace several times since October. He has never seen 144.99. The street ends on every pass he has made at 1430.90. No curve, no house beyond the oak canopy. He has one record of the stop. The GPS log from his route that night, showing him parked at a set of coordinates on Ashford Trace for 8 minutes. He has pulled those coordinates up on satellite view. They show the end of Ashford Trace, the last visible houses, the curve of the street into the tree canopy. He has zoomed in on those coordinates at maximum resolution. He has done it many times. There is no house at those coordinates. There is a space between two very old oak trees where the light seems to fall differently, where the shadows gather with a density that doesn't quite match the surrounding canopy, where something that is almost a clearing exists for just a second of looking before your eyes move past it to the road beyond. 8 minutes. His van sat at those coordinates for 8 minutes, and he has no complete memory of the interior of a house. He is nonetheless described in detail every time someone has asked him about it. He has the sensation of warmth. He has the sensation of a fire. He has the image of the mirror, precise and immovable. The oval frame, the dark wood, the carved repeating pattern. And he has the empty chair. The chair that held him but showed no one. He has been told by people he trusts that this is unsettling, but explicable, that the mind fills in details under stress, that mirrors do things with light and angle, that coordinates on satellite maps are imprecise by meters and the house could simply be obscured by canopy and aerial view. He has nodded when they say these things. He has not argued. He has also stopped looking in mirrors. Not all at once. It happened gradually over weeks. A slow adjustment, a slow turning away. He uses the ones he has to. The one in his van. The bathroom mirror, briefly. He doesn't linger in front of them. He doesn't spend time looking. He's been asked if he's afraid of what he'd see. He says no, that's not it. He's afraid, he says, of what he wouldn't.